Today we're going to be talking about the hemorrhaging woman and the Syrophoenician woman, both of whom encountered Jesus in the Gospels. And so these breakout rooms are closing, and here comes everybody, and then we'll start. Welcome back. How was your time?
Wow.
Good.
I love that. Good. Good conversation.
Well, except that last question, I think we just agreed we need about 10 days to answer that.
Yep. Like I said, that's a one that, people have been discussing forever,
Yeah.
Can we change God's mind? Does God's mind change? How, so I figured I'd lob that out there, see if there were any, real revelations about that. So I hope it was fruitful time.
Yeah,
Does 20 minutes seem to be a good amount of time, especially when those questions are more engaging?
More, maybe 25.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe 20. That's
Or
just
maybe a week and a half.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, good. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. We're going to start first with the hemorrhaging woman, the story of the hemorrhaging woman. The story of the hemorrhaging woman can be found in 3 of the 4 Gospels. They can be found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And you'll find that this story has a lot more in common. Each of these stories have a lot more in common with each other than the 2 stories of the Syrophoenician woman, which we'll get to. There are some pretty key differences between those 2 stories, but in the story of the hemorrhaging woman across all 3 Gospels, it's pretty much consistent. They're pretty consistent with each other. So the story goes like this. Jesus is on his way to Jairus's house to heal his daughter. Jairus was the leader of the local synagogue, and he had thrown himself at the feet of Jesus, begging him to come heal his daughter who was dying. And so Jesus is on his way, and the crowd is pressing in on him. And the hemorrhaging woman comes out of desperation. She has been suffering from 12 years of uterine bleeding, which has caused her great pain and ostracization because she's been considered unclean for 12 years. She had spent all of her money on doctors, and no one was able to heal her. So she hears about Jesus, and she comes to him. And so as he passes by, she works her way through the crowd, confident that if she could just touch the hem of his robe, that she would be healed. So she reaches out and her fingers graze the fringe of his garment. And immediately Jesus stops and asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples are happy to point out that the crowds pressing in means that lots of people are touching him. But Jesus recognizes and is startled by the sudden rushing out of energy from him. There's power that goes out from Jesus, and he feels it and he acknowledges it. Mm-hmm. So he's looking around, he's looking for who touched him. The woman realizes that she cannot remain hidden, and she falls down before Jesus and confesses that she was the one to touch his cloak. In 2 of the accounts, we're gonna look at all the comparisons here, but in 2 of the accounts, as it says, as soon as she touched his cloak, the hemorrhaging stopped and she was healed. In the 3rd example, Jesus blesses her first and then says, "You will be healed," and then she was healed. So it's just a matter of wording. I would like to believe that the power going out of him was what healed her. But Jesus blesses her and says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So let's take a look at the differences across the Gospels. So like I said, there's the story in Matthew, there's a story in Mark, and there's a story in Luke. So the first difference is that the woman actually speaks in Matthew and Mark. In both, she says 11 words, and that's out of the NRSV translation. I didn't double check because that's just what I use. But in Luke, she doesn't speak at all. There's no internal monologue going on, because when she speaks, she says, if I could just touch the hem of his robe, I know I will be healed. But in Luke, she doesn't say any of that. The second difference is that the story in Matthew does not speak to her history with doctors. It doesn't speak to kind of the lengths that she had already gone to try and be healed. In Mark, it says that she had endured much under many physicians and spent all she had. What I think this tells us is that she has gone through probably a lot of painful procedures, a lot of alternative medical practices, and trying to be healed by doctors to no avail. And in Luke, it says, though she had spent all she had on physicians, no one could cure her. In Matthew, it is not said that Jesus felt power go out of him. But in Mark, Jesus feels that power has gone out of him, but he doesn't say so out loud. And then in Luke, Jesus verbally attests to the power that leaves from him. So you kind of have this graduated system of acknowledgement of the exiting of this power from Jesus. So it makes me laugh because in Mark, it basically is telling you what Jesus is thinking, which is just kind of a funny narrative tool that I don't know if it belongs in the Gospels, just because it's making assumptions about what Jesus was thinking. And I just thought that was funny. So, but in Luke, Jesus verbally speaks out loud and says, power has gone from me, who touched me. In Matthew, Jesus sees her. She does not come forward and come to him. He recognizes her as the one who touched him. But in Mark, she comes to Jesus, scripture says, in fear and trembling to tell the truth. And in both Mark and Luke, she falls down before Jesus. And in Luke, it says that she acknowledges that she cannot remain hidden. And so then she comes forward. So there's recognition in all of these examples, but in Matthew, she is not the one who takes that step forward. Jesus is the one who sees her and acknowledges her for the woman as the woman who touched him. And in Matthew, like I said, she's not said to have been made well until Jesus says, your faith has made you well. I don't think this necessarily means that she needed to have that acknowledgement from Jesus to be healed, because as it says in all of the Gospels, that there was power that had gone out of him. So in Matthew, it says, she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, for she had said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be made well. And so it doesn't acknowledge that power had gone out. So maybe it was the blessing that she needed from Jesus to have been healed. But in Mark, as soon as she touches the fringe of his robe, she is healed. It says immediately her hemorrhage stopped. What I love about Mark is that one of the best plot drivers is the word immediately. Mark is all about immediacy, and I really appreciate that about Mark. It says the exact same thing in Luke, that as soon as she touches the hem of his robe, immediately her hemorrhage stops. So there are some differences here. We're going to see more key differences, like I said, in this story of the Syrophoenician woman. But I think it's important that we hold these stories up next to one another and really see what the differences are. Does any of this strike you? I mean, does any of this, what is this bringing up for you?
Two things for me. One is that the risk she took was that she was deemed unclean, and therefore to touch anybody, especially a male, was a real broach of tradition and acknowledged belief. And the
Yeah.
second thing that struck me was Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter, and while he's hanging at the wayside healing an unclean woman, somebody comes and says to Jairus, your daughter died, don't bother the teacher anymore. So, you know, there must have been a, whoa, if only he hadn't stopped, we could be back at Jairus' house healing the child. So there's
Right.
some interesting ambivalence there between people who saw this happen, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. What else?
My reaction was pretty basic right at the very, very beginning, that 12 years is a long time to endure that.
It
Yeah.
must have been very anemic.
Thank you, Doctor.
I was taken with Mark because it's the most extended text of the three. And, you know, I'm always thinking about women and how often we don't hear much about women in our scriptures. And it's almost like there was an emphasis by Mark placed on this story because it was a woman. And the other part of it is that phrase of, if only I could touch his cloak, I will be healed. That comes to me a lot. It's just a phrase that's there a lot of times. And it's faith. It's all about faith.
Yeah.
And that's all I can say.
Yeah, that's great. A seminary colleague of mine always equated themselves with the hemorrhaging woman just because throughout their life they had noticed that until there was a pretty significant conversion moment, that they really were only reaching out to God in moments of desperation, and that theme had run through their life. And so to hold on to something like that, I mean, it really, I think it reminds us that we can always reach out to God. It doesn't always have to be our desperation, because we know that simply touching the hem of a garment or having a small but very significant moment with God can be absolutely life-changing. So I love that you carry that with you. Does anybody else have anything like that where they carry just small pieces of scripture with them?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Good. So what can we learn from the hemorrhaging woman? This is what I came up with. Faith in God can do surprising things. God does not consider any part of us to be irredeemable or incurable. And what I think I mean by that is that even the parts of us that are deemed unworthy or unclean, or the things that make us sinful or dirty or whatever adjective you want to use there, none of that is irredeemable or incurable. The third point I want to make is that sharing our own stories of healing is a really great way to share an experience of God. I hope there was a little bit of that in your breakout rooms, but what else can you come up with?
I am struck by by her response to Jesus when Jesus said, "Who did that?" And I just think of times in my life when I have been in the similar situation of, all right, who did this?
Not me.
And and the fear and that you feel from confessing, as well as the thought that goes through your mind is, if I don't say anything, maybe I won't get caught, kind of thing. But the woman bravely says, it was me. and Jesus responds so lovingly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's power in truth telling. What else?
One of the things that stands out for me is the fact that he was in a very large crowd and yet he knew he had been touched.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for us, that's important. Sometimes we think, oh, he's too busy, but he's not.
Right. Yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit later after we learn about the Syrophoenician woman. We're going to kind of hold these stories up and talk about why they are so significant to Jesus's story. Because these things not only say a lot about these women, but it also says a lot about who Jesus is and the ministry and mission of Jesus, and actually how that kind of shifts, especially in his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. So yeah, this is going to be good going forward. Roseanne, your point's going to be very well made when we get there. Anything else before we move on?
I don't know, I just had an interpretation when Jesus said he felt the power going out of him, that his human side, that was, that's his human part of God and man.
Mm-hmm.
And so he reacted to the human part of him, and I think he was kind of questioning it. I think as he went through his life of being a man, he would turn and say, well, what is this? And that's what I felt when he said, I feel this going out of me, and what is, and who has done this?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that you see the humanity in him.
Yeah. Great. That's a really great observation, because I think a lot of times we consider Jesus one or the other, right? He's either human or he's divine, and it's really hard for us to marry the two. And so even though this is the Christ who performs miracles, there's still this very human side of him who is still learning and still coming to realizations about himself. And this is a good example of that, of him saying, wait, what was that? Who did that? And turning around. And so I think that's a very important point to consider. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that in my creating these slides, I did not include this image. This is a mosaic of the hemorrhaging woman, and this is in a church in Istanbul. And so I wanted to make sure that you saw that and knew what that was, because I did not include it in this slide. And I did not include the Christ and the woman with the issue of the blood, the Veronese. I did not include that in the PowerPoint, but it's important for you to see. I think it's interesting that she's surrounded by two other women, because that's not part of the story. I mean, it's not expressly said or explicitly said. So I think that's an interesting interpretation. And then the first image that you saw is an image that is depicted in the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter, which is just southeast of Rome, I think is what it said. So that's depicted there. And it's very simple, but also I think very powerful. So let's move on to the story of the Syrophoenician woman. The story of the Syrophoenician woman can be found in both the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Mark. And you're going to see, like I've said before, that there are some pretty key differences between the two stories. Jesus has entered the Gentile region of Tyre and Sidon. He's trying to get away from the crowds. He had just gotten done preaching about what defiles a person and had kind of upset some people. So he had left the region where he was and entered into the Gentile territory of Tyre and Sidon, trying to get away from the crowds. A Gentile woman of Syrophoenician origin comes to him and begs him to heal her daughter, who was plagued by a demon. In Matthew's version of the story, Jesus completely ignores her at first, and the disciples urged Jesus to send her away. And Jesus states that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, meaning the Jews. But the woman persists, and she kneels before him and she begs him again. She says, "Lord, help me." And Jesus says to her, either in a testing way or an insulting way, you can be the judge of that, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." The woman, in her wisdom or desperation or some mix of both, responds to Jesus and says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Or the version that's on the slide here says, "It is not," or she says, in Mark's version, she says, "Even the dogs eat the children's crumbs." And so that response alone convinces Jesus to send her out with the promise that her daughter has been healed. So Jesus heals the daughter and sends the woman out. And in Mark's version, the woman returns home to find her daughter lying on the bed with the demon gone. So through this encounter, we see Jesus kind of take a turn and kind of opens that doorway to Gentile blessings on Gentiles. So the differences across these two gospels, like I said, there's a version in Matthew and there's a version in Mark. In Matthew, Jesus has entered the region, but it does not say that he entered a house. It does not say anything. What it says is that a woman comes out to him and shouts at him, and she names him Lord. And in Mark, Jesus has entered a house and the woman comes in to find him. So she goes out to find him and in Matthew, and she comes in to find him in Mark. The woman in Matthew does not kneel before Jesus until Jesus first dismisses her without ever speaking to her. He just flat out ignores her. And in order to get his attention, then she kneels before him and begs him for a second time. But in Mark, she immediately bows down at Jesus's feet, just as she enters his presence. The disciples are with Jesus in Matthew. They're not mentioned in Mark. And they attempt to intervene before she can interact with Jesus, before Jesus is compelled to respond to her. But in Mark's version, Jesus speaks only to her. There are no disciples mentioned, though it's pretty reasonable to assume that he was not traveling alone. So the woman in Matthew responds to Jesus. Here are the differences between her answers. She responds, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And in Mark, she says, "Sir." She doesn't name him Lord in Mark. She says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And in Matthew, Jesus has a much more explicit change of heart here. He says, he lauds her for her belief and says, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. And in Mark, Jesus, let me turn my page here. In Mark, Jesus says, for saying what you did, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And she returns home to find her daughter in bed, healed, the demon gone. So there's some there are some bigger differences between the two stories in Matthew and Mark in this story of this encounter than there was in the differences in the story of the hemorrhaging woman. What does this drum up for you? What kind of things are you feeling right now in response to this story?
I have a question about the Phoenician, the woman. She was not Jewish.
No, she was a Gentile.
She was a Gentile, and the attitude of dismissing her, or I am only here to save the Jews, was startling to me.
Mhm.
And that it would come from Jesus. It didn't surprise me from his apostles or whoever were with him, but
Mhm.
it being credited to him, dismissing her
Mhm.
as, was surprising, and I don't quite understand.
No.
Maybe it was in the interpretation of Matthew and Mark because they were Jewish.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
That's a good
I
point.
don't know.
we do need to consider that. These stories were written by people. So,
I think that the human part of Jesus, you get annoyed, he's annoyed, it shows a human part, but I think after she responds to him, then the divine part takes over.
that's
There's
interesting.
There's another thing
Yeah.
too,
Mhm.
which is we've had 2,000 years for all sorts of sets of grubby little paws to be on these manuscripts, deciding how to improve them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So God said it, yeah, but maybe some other people edited.
I think when we read the Bible, we should always remember that people wrote the Bible.
That
I
is
guess-
true.
I
That is
guess
true.
I did not understand or didn't grasp the meaning of the passages of the dogs. And now I understand what he was saying, comparing those people to dogs. That he was a dog.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Less than a
This
person.
it's just come clear to me now. I've heard the story a lot, but I just never really understood that. But now I do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty jarring realization to come to, I think, because this feels so out of character for Jesus, right? What's your reaction?
Absolutely.
My reaction is I was annoyed. I was, if you'll pardon my saying, pissed. But you know what? That's part of my theology, is that it's okay to be annoyed with Jesus sometimes. And recognizing that there is that human part of Jesus, and that it's okay to be annoyed. And usually in my being annoyed, it leads me to some other revelation about Jesus's work and ministry. So I'm okay with being annoyed sometimes.
Absolutely.
When I was younger, it bothered me.
Mhm.
Oh, you're not supposed to, oh, don't feel that way. But I'm okay with it now. Because it always leads me to something else. I mean, honestly, it does.
Good. Yeah, that's, I'm with you, Shug. The more I accept the fact that I can be pissed off about something or annoyed by something in scripture, it means that I'm engaging it well, because it is drawing something out of me and is therefore deepening my relationship, not only with scripture,
right,
but with the Christ and with the triune God.
Exactly.
Right. I totally adopt and accept all of my annoyance and frustration with scripture.
And here is a model of being honest with God.
Yeah.
Because some people say, I got to get perfect so that I can pray. Well, that's probably not an effective prayer. Well, I don't know. Shut up, Martha.
I'm kind of thinking that maybe the Gentiles treated the Jews that way, spoke to them like they were the dogs. And Jesus was maybe giving it back a little bit. Here's this woman who is representing a whole group of people that diminishes them or is very disrespectful. And I can tell you, though, at a younger age, this particular text really caused me to not want to be a Christian anymore. I'm not kidding. And now when I hear it, I begin to have more insights into it. It's just that when you're young and your faith is kind of getting rocky anyway, and you read this and you can, how could Jesus have ever said this? And it's just, I'm a very different person now, I guess.
I think Jesus was tired and irritable, and he'd gone somewhere else that he hoped not to be recognized. And along comes this woman, and it's like, here we go again. It's her persuasion that helped him to see that she was needy also, and that people outside his parish also needed ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and this might sound way out of league, but this particular passage gives me the feeling that we can hold Jesus accountable.
You bet.
And I like knowing that this is not a one-way relationship. We are in relationship with Jesus. Jesus holds us accountable, and we can hold Jesus accountable, as we see. And I think this woman holds Jesus accountable.
Yes, she does.
It's like, no.
Also, you have to think 2,000 years ago, no television, no internet, no telephones. These women probably did not live near each other, but they had such a strong faith. The word had gotten around somehow, and they knew that if they approached this person, that this healing would somehow take place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how did that word get around? How did they know? The faith was so deep.
This story has a lot of parallels to slavery for me in this country.
Yes.
In terms of
Yeah.
Wow.
I probably could write a thesis about this. I mean, just the parallels that I see here. And Brooke, just the example that you just gave about how these women, though separated, communicated, I mean, how the slaves communicated even though they weren't really allowed to.
Yeah.
How slaves were given the scraps from the master's table as their food. And there's so many parallels here. How dare you speak to me? And things of that nature. Leave me alone. And the issue of Jesus being annoyed as the slave masters were. So here's a lot of parallels to slavery in this country for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
11 o'clock.
Oh,
That's
it's
my
11.
man. That's my man in the computer that tells me what time it is. I haven't figured out how to shut him up, but
Well,
That's just the history of the world.
Yeah. Well, Shug, when you eventually write your thesis on this for your PhD, I look forward to reading it. I do recognize that it is 11 o'clock. I still have a little bit left to do, so I'm going to continue on and finish the presentation. But I understand if you need to leave, so feel free to dismiss yourself. This will be up on YouTube a little bit later today, and you can go and finish it if you aren't able to stay with us. Should be maybe another 5-10 minutes. Unless conversation gets really interesting, as it has been, and so I really appreciate all of the input you guys are giving, because this is really.
Zoom will not automatically turn you off?
It will not. No.
Okay.
So,
Tammy, I'm fascinated to listen to people's perceptions of what Jesus was doing when he was talking to the woman who was a Gentile. You know, I find that so many of the parables I completely misunderstood, and now I'm, you know, as an adult, I've sort of straightened them out. But I remember when I was about 8-9 years old, and I heard this one, I identified with the fact that Jesus was a Jew, and I was appalled by the way that he talked to this woman. And I remember walking away and thinking to myself, Well, he just isn't a Christian yet. He would never do that if he was a Christian.
That's fabulous.
Oh, it's good, Linda.
That's excellent, Linda. With parables, and this is less a parable and more an encounter with Jesus.
Yeah.
But even with parables, there are lots of them that even on my 100th reading of them, I'm finding new things. And so to have them straightened out is hopefully a temporary thing for you. That's my hope for you, is that as you continue to read through parables, that you will continue to find just new ways of looking at them, that you'll get new things out of them every time. And I'll be interested if you have an instance of that in the future. But,
I've had plenty of them when I've talked to you or to Marvin or to other people. And I'm like, I just don't understand this. Would explain it to me. So the question really should be, when will I have my next one?
Yeah, that's a good way to frame that. Yeah. But yeah, Jesus was not a Christian. Unfortunately for us, I guess. I don't know. So what can we learn from the Syrophoenician woman? Here are a couple of things that I came up with. I think we can learn that persistence can absolutely bring results, that faith can play a large part in healing. And that alludes to one of the breakout questions that I offered today. And the third thing is that those outside of our circle of faith are also God's children. What else are you taking away from this story?
I have a question. In the prayer of humble access, it talks about we are not worthy to gather up the crumbs from under thy table.
Mm-hmm.
Is this taken from this story?
Sure
It certainly alludes to it.
That's what I thought when I was reading it. It's like, well, yeah, that sounds like the prayer we say.
Yeah, that's good connection, Mads. I don't know, because I wasn't there when the prayer of humble access was written, but I can imagine that, yes, the allusion to this story is absolutely part of the inspiration for that prayer.
In a sense, none of us are really worthy to pick up the crumbs under the table.
No.
Right.
But he still loves us and is willing to give us that grace.
That's
Well,
absolutely
the grace is the point.
right.
Mhm.
As
Right.
it sets the stage for the rest of the stuff that's absolutely incomprehensible without the explanation of grace.
Well, see, I got a problem with that. I have a problem. My family, I'm the only Episcopalian in my family. My family was AME and Baptist. And I remember really being upset at hearing this constant message that we're not worthy. And it was one of the things that drew me away from that particular religion. And I think we are worthy. And
Right.
I just
I
cannot
agree.
accept that we're not worthy to have the crumbs. And I just can't.
I wonder if we reframe that a little bit and say, we are worthy because of the ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, without whom we still would be unworthy.
Right. I like that better.
Yeah.
Or to believe that we are made in the image of God. That's hard to accept fully,
I have a persistent interior monologue that tells me I am not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
Not without respite, but it's recurring for sure.
What do you do to combat that, Martha?
Find someone to talk to about it.
truly. I mean, without the plural pronoun, I'm toast.
Sure. Good. I appreciate that you called that for what it is, because I think we all have at least moments, if not long stretches of our lives where we are constantly telling ourselves that we are not good enough, worthy enough, whatever enough. And I know that there are men in this group, but it's also just hard as a woman, you know, being held to such high standards. So yeah, that's, to be told you're not good enough really takes a lot to, it really does take a lot to kind of come back from that and to heal that part of your inner monologue. So I do hope that you are constantly reaching out to the people who are helping to build you up.
I think it's great to hear about the women in the Bible. I mean, I went to a parochial school, so, you know, we had Bible studies, et cetera, every single day. And you hear about the men. You study
Right.
the men, with the exception of Mary and Salome. You know, you hear the men. And it's interesting now to see that there were all of these women who were also prominent enough to be mentioned in the Bible.
And Jesus didn't ignore them. He paid a lot of attention. His best friends were women.
Right.
I think the point was made maybe last week that because these stories are mentioned in multiple gospels, it really speaks to how important these stories and these women are to the story of Jesus. So let's keep going. So here are the two images that I pulled out. I know the one on the right is blurry, but the one on the left is an etching by Pietro del Po, circa 1650. And the one on the right is from Très riche Heures du Duc de Berry. It's from the 15th century. The Très riche Heures is a book of the hours, of praying the hours. And that was from the 15th century. And it came with all of these very vivid and vibrant illustrations in it as well. So that's just an example. You can definitely look that up.
No, not particularly.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Okay, sounds good.
So why are these stories important to Jesus's ministry? I think we've touched on a lot of this, but I want to hold these up against, or next to, not against one another, but next to one another, and talk about this. So since we were on the Syrophoenician woman, let's start with her. So if you look to the right box, Jesus is initially hesitant, and we've put different language around that to help this woman because she's not Jewish. And so we've certainly discussed that. I think her story is also important to Jesus's ministry because her act of bravery and her quick thinking led Jesus to open the door for miracles and healing to all people. This woman was the gateway to our own inclusion into the healing grace of Christ, because this story really exploded the ministry of Christ outside of the Jewish community. So those are some of the reasons I came up with. Is there anything else you'd like to add? So let's go back then to the hemorrhaging woman and why her story is important to Jesus's ministry. In the Gospel of Matthew, so technically in the New Testament, she's the first woman to speak. And this is the first time that Jesus unintentionally healed someone. Jesus did not will the power to go out of his body. It left him, right? I think this story is important because the power of God radiated through Jesus in such a powerful way that it seeped even through his clothing. This woman's desperate act and bold faith, there's bravery and boldness on both of these women's part, were enough to pull that divinity out from Jesus. And the power going out of Jesus in the moment, which we've talked about, it was surprising even to him, that Jesus learned something in that moment and in this encounter as well. Anything else that you can come up with?
Well, I was thinking that this happened in the context of a huge crowd of people. And because Jesus turned and wanted to find out who that woman was or who the person was, it brought attention to it. And there seems to be a knowing that she was healed, that all of those people that were following him witnessed that, and it impacted their lives. And maybe they had a greater faith as a result of that.
Yeah. Yeah, there were lots of witnesses to this miracle and to then this woman's confession of being the person who kind of put that miracle into motion. Anything else? Oh, there are still so many of you here. I'm so happy to see you all. I have to say, this has been my favorite of our conversations so far, because you all were so engaged, and I really appreciate all of the conversation that we've had. Anything to wrap up as we wrap up? Anything to kind of help us conclude today? Any last thoughts or?
Don't be afraid to ask.
Don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that can be said is no. And even if it's no the first time, be persistent, because you never know. Well, let's wrap up with a prayer, shall we? This is a prayer for peace. I know it's not. This is a prayer for social justice from the Book of Common Prayer. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart, and especially the hearts of the people of this land, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatreds cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much for continuing to come to these sessions. Next week, I will be out of town, so Mother Liz is going to lead us in a discussion about some bad girls in the New Testament. We've got Herodias, who is Herod's wife, and her daughter Salome, and Pilate's wife as well. So they're women who had a very heavy hand in the execution of two of our major players in the New Testament. So that'll be fun. So I will hopefully be joining you, but I won't be leading. Mother Liz will be leading you. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you all so much. Today was a real pleasure, and it's so good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.